You know what they say about assumptions? They make an ass out of you and me. Well, in this case, they made an ass out of the entire Galactic Council, and trust me, that's a lot of asses to go around. My name is Korvak Thendros, and I used to be what you might call a military advisor to the High Council of Vexlar Prime. Notice I said used to be. After what happened 72 hours ago, let's just say my career trajectory took a nosedive faster than a broken starship in a gravity well. The whole mess started 3 months ago when those bipedal mammals from the third planet of Sol System Earth, they call it, submitted their application for membership in the Galactic Union. Can you believe it? Beefer, the audacity. Here we were, a collection of advanced civilizations spanning 14 galaxies, and these creatures thought they belonged among us. Sir, my assistant Blixer had said, sliding the application across my desk with 2 of his 4 arms, the humans are requesting accelerated membership status. I nearly choked on my fermented plasma beverage. Accelerated. Have they lost their collective minds? I grabbed the datapad and scrolled through their pathetic credentials. Look at this garbage, Blixer. They've barely mastered interplanetary travel. Their longest space mission was, what, a few years to their outer planets? We've got cargo haulers that stay in space longer than that. Blixer's orange skin rippled with what I now know was nervousness, though at the time I thought it was amusement. They've included some interesting data about their capabilities, sir. Capabilities? I laughed so hard my third lung nearly gave out. What capabilities? They can't even agree on a single planetary government. Half their species is still convinced their planet is flat. For crying out loud, that's when Commander Vex Prime Zorilla walked into my office. Now, Zorilla was what you'd call a hardliner, 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, and possessing the charming personality of a plasma cannon. She took one look at the human application, and her mandibles clicked in what I mistook for approval. These humans, she said, her voice like grinding metal. They amuse me. Amuse you? I raised my eyebrow stalks. Commander, with respect, they're barely above the level of primitive hunter-gatherers. Look at their military technology, chemical propulsion rockets, kinetic weapons, and they still fight wars with metal vehicles that roll around on the ground like some kind of toys? Zorilla suggested, though something in her tone should have warned me. Exactly. Toys. Primitive, inefficient toys. I gestured dismissively at the application. Their strongest weapon is something called a nuclear device that they've only used twice in their entire history. Twice. We use antimatter charges to clear our driveways. Blixer shifted uncomfortably. Sir, perhaps we should review their psychological profiles more carefully. Psychological profiles? I waved him off. What's to review? They're clearly a peaceful species. Look at their entertainment media. They spend more time making stories about friendship and cooperation than actual warfare. Half their popular culture is about beings from other worlds visiting them peacefully. They're practically begging to be conquered. And that, my friends, is where we made our first mistake. Actually, let me be more precise, that's where we made our first of approximately 4,000 mistakes, but who's counting? The Galactic Council meeting was scheduled for the following week. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Station, and a massive structure that took 300 years to build and could house the population of a small moon. The humans had sent a delegation of 5 individuals, which seemed laughably small considering the magnitude of what they were proposing. I remember watching them walk into the chamber. These tiny bipedal creatures with their soft skin and their ridiculously small number of limbs. Their leader, a female named Captain Elena Vasquez, couldn't have been more than 6 feet tall. 6 feet. I've seen houseplants taller than that. Honorable council members, Captain Vasquez began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, despite her lack of vocal amplification organs. We come before you today to request membership in the Galactic Union. The chamber erupted in what I can only describe as polite laughter. The Thraxians were clicking their beaks in amusement. The Zolthari were flashing their bioluminescent patches in complex patterns that roughly translated to how adorable. And the Kethmaran delegation was making that whistling sound they make when they find something particularly entertaining. Counselor Vex Prime Gornath, a massive crystalline being whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, finally restored order. Captain Vasquez, he said, his voice like singing crystal, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, the Council has certain requirements for membership. Perhaps you could tell us about your species' military capabilities. Certainly, Vasquez replied, and I swear I saw the hint of a smile on her face. We have approximately 200 sovereign nations on our planet, maintaining various military forces totaling around 65 million active personnel. The chamber fell silent. 65 million? For one planet? I'm sorry, Counselor Gornath said, his crystalline form flickering with what I now recognize as concern. Did you say 65 million military personnel? For a single world? Active personnel, yes, Vasquez confirmed. We also maintain approximately 300 million in reserve forces, and our civilian population has extensive training in warfare through various cultural and educational programs. The silence stretched on. I felt my confidence wavering slightly, but I pushed the doubt aside. Numbers meant nothing if the quality wasn't there. What about your weapons technology? Asked Counselor T. Ranex, the Mollusk Coalition's representative. We have various delivery systems, Vasquez replied casually. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine launch systems, aircraft-delivered munitions, and portable devices. Our nuclear arsenal alone consists of approximately 13,000 warheads, 13,000 nuclear devices. For one species, on one planet. Dati, and your space-based weapons? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't have any, Vasquez said simply. Relief flooded through me. Ah, there we have it. No space-based weapons. Clearly your species is not ready for the realities of galactic warfare. That's when Vasquez smiled. Really smiled. And let me tell you, when a human smiles like that, you should probably start running. Oh, she said. We don't need space-based weapons. We have something better. And what might that be? Counselor Gornath asked. Humans, she replied. The delegates looked at each other in confusion. What did that even mean? Perhaps, suggested High Admiral Crix Tal of the Hegemony Fleet, we should proceed with the standard evaluation process. A simple demonstration of military capability against one of our training scenarios. These were holographic simulations that new species had to complete to demonstrate their readiness for galactic citizenship. The scenarios were designed to test strategic thinking, technological adaptation, and combat effectiveness. They were also designed to be impossible for primitive species to complete. We accept, Vasquez said immediately. Too immediately. In hindsight, that should have been our second warning sign. The scenario was called the Kepler Gambit, a complex military situation involving the defense of a star system against a technologically superior enemy force. The scenario had been attempted by 43 different species over the past century. The best performance had been achieved by the Arcturian Collective, who managed to hold out for 6 hours before being overwhelmed. The parameters are simple, Admiral Crix Tal explained to the human delegation. You will be given command of a standard defensive fleet, 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and 72 fighter craft. The enemy force consists of 300 vessels of various classes, including 2 dreadnoughts and a Planet Killer-class vessel. Your objective is to prevent the enemy from reaching the inhabited planet in the system. Rules of engagement? Asked one of the human delegates, a man named Colonel Marcus Stone. Standard galactic warfare protocols apply. Crix Tal replied, no targeting of civilian populations, no use of planet-destroying weapons, no violation of sanctuary zones around medical facilities. What about the enemy? Stone asked. Do they follow the same rules? Of course not. Crix Tal laughed. They're the aggressors. They follow no rules. The humans exchanged glances. Captain Vasquez nodded to her team. We'll need 30 minutes to review the scenario parameters and develop our strategy. 30 minutes. Most species requested at least a week to prepare for the Kepler Gambit. The Thraxians had taken a full month and still failed spectacularly. I settled back in my observation chair, ready to watch another primitive species embarrass themselves in front of the council. This would be educational, if nothing else. The humans would fail, their application would be rejected, and we could all go back to our normal lives of managing a galaxy without having to worry about another species of violent primitives. How wrong I was. The simulation began at 1,400 hours Galactic Standard Time. The human fleet was positioned in a standard defensive formation around the fourth planet of the test system. The enemy force was approaching from the outer system, moving in the classic hammer and anvil formation that had proven effective against every previous challenger. Interesting, Admiral Krixtal observed as the human fleet began to move. They're not maintaining defensive positions around the planet. Instead, the human fleet was spreading out, moving into what appeared to be a completely random pattern. Their smaller vessels were advancing toward the enemy force while their heavy cruisers were falling back toward the planet. They're retreating before the battle even begins, laughed Counselor Vex Prime Gornath. How disappointingly predictable. But I was watching the tactical display more carefully, and something was bothering me. The human ship movements weren't random at all, they were following a pattern. But it was unlike anything I'd seen before. Admiral, I said quietly. Are you seeing this? Seeing what? Krixtal replied, his attention focused on the main display where the enemy force was beginning to engage the human fighters. The pattern, I said. Look at the positioning of their vessels. That's when the first surprise hit. The human fighters, instead of engaging the enemy in traditional dogfighting combat, were using something called swarming tactics. They would converge on a single enemy vessel from multiple directions, overwhelm its defensive systems, and then immediately disperse to engage the next target. It was like watching a pack of predators hunting much larger prey. Curious, Counselor Gornath admitted, but ultimately ineffective. Their fighters are too small to cause significant damage to capital ships, except they weren't trying to cause significant damage. They were doing something else entirely. They're marking targets. I realized with growing alarm. They're using their fighters to designate priority targets for their heavy vessels, and that's when the second surprise hit. The human heavy cruisers, which had appeared to be retreating, suddenly opened fire, but they weren't firing at the closest enemy vessels. They were firing at specific targets across the entire enemy formation, targets that their fighters had marked with what appeared to be some kind of targeting system. How are they coordinating fire across such distances? Admiral Krixtal demanded. The communication lag should make that impossible, unless, I said slowly, they're not using traditional communication methods. The third surprise came when the enemy force tried to adapt to the human tactics. The simulation was designed to learn from the defending force's strategy and counter it. Every previous species had fallen victim to this adaptive programming, not the humans. And instead of being countered, the human fleet seemed to anticipate the enemy's adaptation. Their formations shifted before the enemy could exploit perceived weaknesses. Their attack patterns changed before the enemy could develop effective countermeasures. It's like they're reading the enemy's mind, whispered Blixer. Impossible, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The fourth surprise was the most disturbing of all. As the battle progressed, the human fleet began to demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't have been possible with the ships they'd been given. Their fighters were performing maneuvers that should have crushed their pilots under crushing gravitational forces. Their heavy cruisers were firing with accuracy that exceeded the theoretical limits of their targeting systems. How are they doing this? Demanded Counselor Gornath. Captain Vasquez, who had been quietly observing the simulation, finally spoke. We're not doing anything that any other species couldn't do, she said. We're just doing it better. And that's when I began to understand the true horror of what we were witnessing. The humans weren't using superior technology. They weren't using secret weapons or advanced tactics that we'd never seen before. They were simply using the same equipment and following the same rules as every other species. They were just better at it. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, The human fleet had not only prevented the enemy from reaching the planet, they had completely annihilated the attacking force. Not a single enemy vessel remained functional. The simulation chamber was silent, except for the hum of the holographic generators powering down. "That," said Captain Vasquez into the silence, "was fun. Do you have any more challenging scenarios?" More challenging scenarios. They wanted more challenging scenarios. "Captain," Admiral Crixtal said slowly, "you do realize that what you just accomplished is considered impossible by every military strategist in the galaxy?" "Really?" Vasquez looked genuinely surprised. "It seemed pretty straightforward to us. Your enemy was predictable, your defensive parameters were clearly defined, and your victory conditions were achievable through standard tactical doctrine." Standard tactical doctrine. They called what we'd just witnessed standard tactical doctrine. "Perhaps," suggested High Counselor Gornath, "we should discuss the terms of your membership application." And that's when we made our biggest mistake of all. We assumed that what we'd just seen was the extent of human military capability. We were wrong. So very, very wrong. But that's a story for another time, because what happened next makes everything I've told you so far look like a children's game. The next 72 hours would change everything we thought we knew about warfare, about power, and about the nature of intelligence itself. The humans had just shown us their idea of a defensive operation. We were about to learn what they considered an offensive one. If you think the first part of this story was bad, buckle up, because what happened next makes that simulation look like a friendly neighborhood barbecue. Remember how I mentioned that the humans had impressed us with their defensive capabilities? Well, it turns out that showing off their military prowess wasn't their real objective. No. These crafty bipedal mammals had something much more ambitious in mind. The morning after their successful completion of the Kepler Gambit, I was nursing what my species calls a cerebral fluid headache when Blixer burst into my office with all four arms flailing in panic. Sir, you need to see this immediately." I looked up from my desk, where I'd been reviewing the tactical analysis of the human simulation for the 100th time. "Blixer, unless the station is under attack, I don't want to hear it." "Sir," he said, his orange skin now a pale yellow with terror, "the station is under attack." That got my attention. I grabbed my personal communicator and switched to the emergency frequency. What I heard made my blood freeze in my veins. "All stations. This is Admiral Crixtal. We have multiple unknown vessels approaching Nexus Station. They appear to be using some form of stealth technology. All defensive systems are—" Wait, what the hell is that? The communication cut to static. I rushed to the observation deck, Blixer right behind me. What I saw through the massive transparent aluminum viewport defied everything I thought I knew about space warfare. Surrounding Nexus Station, seemingly appearing from nowhere, were hundreds of vessels. But these weren't the primitive chemical propulsion craft we'd seen in the human files. These were sleek, angular ships that moved with a fluid grace that suggested technology far beyond what we'd attributed to humanity. "How many?" I whispered. "Preliminary scans indicate approximately 1,500 vessels," Blixer reported, his voice shaking. "Sir, they're not showing up on our sensors. We can only see them visually." 1,500 ships. The entire galactic defense fleet consisted of maybe 3,000 vessels spread across 14 galaxies. And here were 1,500 unknown craft, just sitting there like they owned the place. "Are they hostile?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Unknown, sir. They're not responding to our communications, and they're maintaining a defensive formation around the station. It's like they're protecting us." "Protecting us? From what?" That's when my personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender ID made my heart skip several beats. "Captain Elena Vasquez." Advisor Thendros. Her voice came through with crystal clarity despite the apparent communication blackout affecting the rest of the station. "And would you mind joining us in Conference Room Alpha? We have some things to discuss." I looked at Blixer, who had gone completely pale. "Should I call security, sir?" "With what?" I gestured toward the viewport. "Against that? I don't think security is going to help us here." The walk to conference room Alpha felt like the longest journey of my life. Every step echoed in the corridors, which seemed strangely empty. Where was everyone? Where was the usual bustle of activity that made Nexus Station feel alive? I found my answer when I reached the conference room. Every major representative from the Galactic Council was already there, each sitting around the massive circular table with expressions ranging from confusion to barely controlled panic. At the head of the table sat Captain Vasquez, looking remarkably calm for someone who had apparently just orchestrated the largest military operation in galactic history. "Ah, Advisor Thindros," she said pleasantly as I entered. "Please, have a seat. We were just getting started." "Captain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "perhaps you could explain what's happening here." "Of course," she replied, folding her hands on the table. "We're conducting a peaceful transition of governmental authority." The room erupted in chaos. High Counselor Gornath's crystalline form flashed with angry red light. Admiral Krixtal was shouting something about acts of war. The Thraxian delegate was making those aggressive clicking sounds that usually preceded violence. Vasquez waited patiently for the noise to die down, then continued as if nothing had happened. "As I was saying, we're implementing a new administrative structure for the galaxy. Nothing too dramatic, really. Think of it as a corporate reorganization. This is an invasion." Admiral Krixtal roared, "You're declaring war on the entire Galactic Union." "War?" Vasquez looked genuinely puzzled. "Admiral, we haven't fired a single shot. We haven't damaged any property. We haven't even disrupted your daily operations, except for this small meeting. How exactly is this a war? You've surrounded our capital station with a hostile fleet." Gornath's voice was like breaking glass. "Hostile?" Vasquez shook her head. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Our ships are here for defensive purposes only. We're protecting you." "Protecting us from what?" I demanded. That's when she smiled, that terrifying human smile again. "From the consequences of your own actions, Advisor Thindros." She touched a control on the table, and the room's main display activated. What we saw made every being in the room fall silent. The display showed a tactical map of the entire galaxy. Scattered across the star systems were thousands of red dots, each one representing what appeared to be a military installation or fleet position. "What you're looking at," Vasquez explained calmly, "is the current military disposition of every species in the Galactic Union. Every weapon, every ship, every fortification. We've been monitoring your activities for quite some time." "That's impossible," whispered Counselor Theoranax. "Our security protocols are adorable," Vasquez finished. "Really they are. We especially enjoyed the quantum encryption you're so proud of. It took our computers almost 3 full seconds to crack it." 3 seconds. The quantum encryption that had taken our best scientists 2 centuries to develop. "You see," Vasquez continued, "when we submitted our application for membership, we weren't really asking for permission to join your little club. We were informing you of our intention to assume administrative control of galactic affairs. And if we refuse?" Admiral Krixtal asked, though his voice lacked its earlier bluster. "Refuse?" Vasquez looked confused. "Admiral, I think you misunderstand the nature of our relationship here. This isn't a negotiation. This is a briefing." She touched another control, and the display changed to show a different view. This one showed the approach vectors that the human fleet had used to surround Nexus Station. "Our ships didn't just appear here," she explained. "They've been in position for the past 6 months. We've been watching, listening, and evaluating your civilization's readiness for integration into a more efficient governmental structure." 6 months. They'd been watching us for 6 months, and we'd never even known they were there. "The truth is," Vasquez said, leaning back in her chair, "your species have been remarkably inefficient in your approach to galactic governance. 14 different major conflicts in the past century alone. Resource allocation disputes that have left entire systems impoverished while others hoard wealth. A military structure so fragmented that it couldn't respond effectively to a real threat if one appeared, and you think you can do better." I found myself asking. "We know we can," she replied simply. "We've run the simulations. Under human administration, galactic productivity will increase by approximately 400% within the first decade. Military conflicts will decrease by 97%. Resource distribution will be optimized to eliminate scarcity-based conflicts. You're talking about conquest, Gornath said, his crystalline form now pulsing with a sickly green light. We're talking about management, Vasquez corrected. Think of it this way, your species have been playing a game of galactic civilization for centuries. You've been losing badly. We're here to show you how to win. What makes you think we'll cooperate? Admiral Krixtal demanded. Vasquez touched the control again. The display now showed detailed technical specifications for weapons systems I didn't recognize. The energy output readings were impossible because, she said quietly, the alternative is rather unpleasant. The room fell silent again. We were looking at weapons technology that made our most advanced systems look like stone knives and bearskins. How? I whispered. How is this possible? Your species has barely achieved interplanetary travel. Your technology is primitive compared to ours, is it? Vasquez asked. Advisor Thendros, what do you think our greatest technological achievement is? I thought about what I'd seen in their files. Your computers? Close, but not quite. Our greatest technological achievement is something you've never encountered before, because no other species in the galaxy has ever developed it. And what's that? Gornath asked. Coordinated intelligence, Vasquez replied. Every other species we've encountered thinks of intelligence as an individual property. You have smart individuals and less smart individuals. You compete with each other even within your own species. You hoard knowledge and guard secrets. She paused, letting that sink in. Humans don't work that way. We've learned to function as a collective intelligence while maintaining our individual identities. Every human ship out there is connected to every other human ship. Every human mind is part of a larger thinking process. We're not just a species with technology. We are the technology. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a meteor strike. You're saying? I'm saying that when we completed your little simulation yesterday, we weren't just showing you our military capabilities, we were showing you how 1,500 human ships can function as a single organism. How 1,500 human crews can think as one mind while maintaining their individual creativity and initiative. And that's how you've been monitoring us, I realized. Among other things, yes. We've been learning everything there is to know about your species, your technology, your weaknesses, and your strengths. We've been preparing for this moment for decades. Decades? Admiral Krixtal looked confused. But you've only known about us for 3 months. Vasquez laughed. And it was not a pleasant sound. Admiral, we've known about the Galactic Union for over 50 years. We've been monitoring your communications, studying your technology, and preparing for eventual contact since before most of you were born. Then why wait? Gornath asked. Why not make contact sooner? Because we weren't ready, Vasquez said simply. We needed time to develop the necessary technologies, to prepare our society for the responsibility of galactic governance, and to study your species thoroughly enough to know how to manage you effectively. Manage us, I repeated. Think of it as a promotion, she said cheerfully. You'll no longer have to worry about the burden of making decisions that affect billions of lives. We'll handle all of that for you. You can focus on what you do best: scientific research, cultural development, artistic expression, all the things that make your species unique and valuable. And if we resist? Admiral Krixtal asked. Why would you resist? Vasquez looked genuinely puzzled. We're offering you peace, prosperity, and freedom from the responsibilities that have been crushing your civilizations for centuries. We're offering you the chance to become the best versions of yourselves under human rule. Under human guidance, she corrected. We're not conquerors, Admiral. We're administrators. We're here to make your lives better. And if we don't want our lives to be better, I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Visor Thendros, Vasquez said quietly. That's not really an option anymore. She touched the control one final time. The display showed Earth, our small blue planet that we dismissed as primitive and harmless. What you're seeing, she said, is our homeworld as it exists today, not the backward agricultural planet you saw in our application files, the real Earth. The planet was surrounded by a lattice of orbital installations that boggled the mind. Massive space elevators stretched from the surface to orbital platforms that dwarfed anything we'd ever built. The planet itself glowed with the light of cities that covered entire continents. We've been preparing for this moment for over a century, Vasquez continued. Every human who's ever lived has contributed to this project. Every advance in our technology, every improvement in our society, every lesson we've learned from our own mistakes has been directed toward this goal. Which is? Gornath asked. To give the galaxy the government it deserves, she replied. To end the cycle of conflict and inefficiency that has plagued galactic civilization for millennia. To create a future where every species can thrive, under human control. Under human guidance, she repeated. We're not here to dominate you. We're here to help you become everything you're capable of becoming. She stood up, and somehow the simple act of a single human rising from a chair made every being in the room feel small and vulnerable. The transition begins immediately, she announced. Your military forces will be integrated into our command structure. Your governments will be restructured to optimize efficiency and eliminate corruption. Your economies will be reorganized to eliminate waste and ensure equitable distribution of resources. And if we refuse? I asked one final time. Vasquez looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Advisor Dendros, she said gently. The time for refusal ended the moment we arrived. You called us weak. You dismissed us as primitive. You thought we were asking for your permission to join your galactic community. She walked to the viewport and gazed out at the fleet of human ships that surrounded the station. What you didn't understand is that we weren't asking for permission. We were offering you the opportunity to surrender gracefully. And now, she said, turning back to face us, welcome to the new Galactic Order. Earth is now the capital of the galaxy. Humanity is now the administrative species. And you are now citizens of the human hegemony. I think, she added with that terrifying human smile, you're going to like it here. Outside the viewport, the human fleet began to move, not in the chaotic patterns of traditional space warfare, but in perfect synchronization, like a single organism with 1,500 bodies. And that's how, in the space of 72 hours, the species we dismissed as weak and primitive became the rulers of the galaxy. The worst part, they were right. Under human administration, galactic civilization flourished like never before. Wars ended. Poverty disappeared. Scientific advancement accelerated beyond anything we'd ever imagined. They hadn't conquered us. They'd saved us from ourselves, and that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thing of all, because it meant that everything they'd told us was true. We really had needed them to show us how to run a galaxy properly. We'd called them weak. They'd called us inefficient. Guess who was right?